all the lovely things so fine and true. I see you in the beauty of the flowers and the rain. I see you between the lines of a sweet refrain. I'm so blessed, my Lord, I can see you, even when I'm lonely and in pain. I see you in the beauty of the stars at night. I see you in my life, I feel alright. I see you, Lord, in sorrow and in happiness. I see you in the glory of sweet success. I see you, Lord, every hour, every day. I can see you, Lord, whenever I pray. I'm so blessed, my Lord, I can see you in the smile of a baby, sweet and true. I can see you in the eyes of my very best friends. I see you in this smiles, just like the love that never ends. I see you, Lord, in sorrow and in happiness. I see you in the glory of sweet success. I see you, Lord, every hour, every day. I can see you, Lord, whenever I pray. I see you, Lord, in sorrow and in happiness. I see you in the glory of sweet success. I see you, Lord, every hour, every day. I can see you, Lord, whenever I pray. I pray. I can see you, Lord, whenever I pray. I see you, Lord.
Ako'y labis mapagpatang Jesus, may mahalagang bukat. Do'y maagos dun sa krus, dun sa krus, aking walang ang mga takos-takos sa aking pakita. Ako ay tulungan mo na lumagpatlina. Doon sa krus, aking walatiha hanggang kaluluwa makapagpahinga. Doon sa kalapit ng krus, ako'y maghihintay hanggang aking bukan ng buhay. Doon sa krus, aking walatiha hanggang kaluluwa'y makapagpahinga. Doon sa krus, aking walatiha hanggang
When I am down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burden me, that I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. more than I can be. We're an anchor for those who are hurting. We're a harbor for those who are lost. Sometimes it's not always easy carrying calories across. Been ridiculed by those who don't know Him, and mocked by those who don't believe. Still I love standing up for my Jesus, 'cause of all that He's done for me. That's why I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. No, I'm not afraid to be counted, and I'm willing to give my life. See, I'm right to be all He wants me to be. Give up the wrong for the right. No, I am not ashamed of the gospel. No, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. For every moment His hand has heard mercy, for all the love that He's shown all my life. A simple thanks that's to say how I'm feeling. I get tears in my eyes. So as for me, I'm gonna keep on believing in the one who's been so faithful to me. I'm not out to please this world around me. I've got my mind on eternity. That's why I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. No, I am not afraid to be counted, and I'm willing to give my life. See, I'm ready to be all He wants me to be. Give up the wrong for the right. No, I am not ashamed of the gospel. No, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I gospel. No, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. I've got too much behind me to let this remind me. The sun is a name, but to me is my everything. No, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. No, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. No, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Ayan, maraming salamat sa ating mga kapatid na umawit po ngayong gabi na ito. Tunay nga po mga kapatid at mga kaibigan, sa gabing ito ay isang napaka-espesyal na gabi. Ano po, sapagkat tayo po ay ang magkakaroon ng kasagutan ng ating pong mga katanungan sa ating pong tanong tungkol sa COVID-19 vaccine. Sino po sa atin ngayong gabi na ito mga kapatid ang meron pang katanungan at agam-agam tungkol po sa tungkol sa vaccine ng COVID-19? Ito ba ay safe? Tayo po ba ay magkakaroon ng o mag-iibang ating mga DNA? Mga kapatid, marami po sa panahon ngayon at lalong-lalo na po sapagkat nung nakaraan ako po ay naglabas ng isang video tungkol po sa vaccination. Ayan, dito po yung nag-aralan natin kung ito ba ay mark of the beast at marami pang iba. Ano po? At marami po ngayon mga kapatid sa ating iglesia ang merong pong iba't ibang paniniwala. Lalong-lalo na marami po sa ating iglesia ang lumalabas ng mga iba't ibang turo sa vaccine na kung saan after 3 years mamamatay ka na. At marami po mga kapatid at mga kaibigan. At ngayon pong gabi ay ito po ay masasagot po lahat ng ating pong katanungan. At kung kayo po ay meron po mga tanong mga kapatid sa ating pong mga nanonood ngayong gabi, ay maari po nating i-comment lamang po sa ating comment section. Ayan. At nawa po, i-share din po natin itong live natin na ito sa ating po mga kapatid na kung saan isa sila sa mga nagtatanong. May mga katanungan pa tungkol sa vaccine na ito mga kapatid. I-share natin sa kanila upang mabigyan din sila ng kalinawan sa gabing ito. Ngayon pong gabi na ito mga kapatid ay lahat tayo ay sabay-sabay nating pag-aaralan ang mga tungkol po sa vaccination po ngayong gabi na ito. Ngunit bago po yan mga kapatid, nais ko pong batiin ang mga kapatid natin na kasama natin nag-tune in ngayon. Ayan sa mga comment section, kay Dory Castro Andoiza. Ayan, Dory Castro Andoiza, kay kapatid na Beth Galang, kay kapatid na Malik Hood, ayan, from Virginia, USA. Ayun din po ang ating mga kapatid, hindi ko po mabati yung ilan sapagkat yung aking pong mga nakikita lamang na kasama natin ngayon ay yung mga nasa comment section po natin mga kapatid. At kayo po ay welcome po sa ating lahat. Mga kapatid, mga kaibigan, bago po natin ibigay ang pagkakataon sa ating pong tagapagsalita, nais ko pong ipakilala siya, mga kapatid. Siya po ay isang immunologist, mga kapatid. Pag sinabi po nating immunologist, sila po yung mga doktor natin na nag-aaral tungkol po sa ating immune system. Isa po sila sa mga tumutulong, nagbibigay ng kaalaman, mga kapatid, kung paano maprotektahan ang ating mga immune system, paano ito palakasin, at alam din po nila kung ano po yung mga gamot na mas makakatulong sa ating pong immune system. At ang ating pong tagapagsalita ay walang iba kundi si Dr. David Burt. Bago po natin sa Kanya maibigay ang pagkakataon, mga kapatid, nais natin ibigay ang pagkakataon sa ating pong tanging bilang sa gabing ito na ipagkakaloob po sa atin ni Ray Marie Reyes from Mexico, Pampanga. Ibigay po natin sa kanilang pagkakataon.
How beautiful the hands that serve the wine and the bread and the sons of the earth. How beautiful the feet that walk the long dusty roads and the hill to the cross. How beautiful, how beautiful, how beautiful is the body of Christ. How beautiful the heart that bled, that took all my sin and bore it instead. How beautiful the tender eyes that chose to forgive and never despise. How beautiful, how beautiful, how beautiful is the body of Christ. And as He laid down His life, we offer this sacrifice, that we will live just as He died, willing to pay the price, willing to pay the price. How beautiful the radiant bride who waits for her groom with his light in her eyes. How beautiful when humble hearts give the fruit of pure lives so that others may live. How beautiful, how beautiful,
vaccines have been given around the world for diseases. Today, I'm going to talk to you about COVID-19 vaccines. At the moment, we have a number of vaccines that have been developed and approved for use against COVID-19. If you think back a year ago, when the pandemic was just starting, who would believe that in less than a year we'd have vaccines against COVID-19? Vaccines that were developed, approved, and also used throughout the world. At the moment, there are about 200 vaccines in development at various stages for COVID-19. Some of them have been authorized, and 130 million doses of these vaccines have been given around the world. Now, to many people, this is a miracle of scientific endeavor. For others, they're more cautious. Is it possible that a vaccine can be developed so rapidly? And so a number of individuals are very cautious about taking the vaccine and have a sort of wait and see approach to whether they're going to take the vaccine or not. So today, I want to give you some information about the COVID vaccines that have been approved. And I hope that this will help you to make an informed decision about these vaccines. So we're going to cover how the vaccines have been developed, their mode of action, what's actually in the vaccines, and are the vaccines safe and effective? I like this slide because it's a metaphor for the situation that we're in at the moment, and it tells us about where vaccines sit in our arsenal against the pandemic. This metaphor uses cheese slices to represent the various layers of protection that we are asked to follow in order to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. And you notice that the slide shows you a number of layers, and the cheese layers represent things like wearing a mask, social distancing. We're talking about government messaging. We're talking about washing hands carefully, and we're talking about vaccines. Now, you notice that Swiss cheese slices are being used in this metaphor. Swiss cheese has holes in it. And what this represents is that individually, each of these layers of protection have holes, they have defects. So if you don't wear a mask properly, then you're not going to be protected enough from the vaccine, from the virus, sorry. However, if we use and combine all of these layers of protective methods together, then we'll have a significant impact in terms of protecting us against the virus and also protecting others because we won't be transmitting the virus. Now, vaccines play an important role in this arsenal of methods that we have because vaccines are thought to be the last piece of the puzzle that will enable us to get back to something close to normal activities in society. Vaccines will induce immunity in individuals who take the vaccine. And if enough individuals have immunity, and which we call herd immunity, then we'll be able to ensure that the virus has very limited way of actually transmitting through the community because most people will be immune. So, why vaccines? Well, vaccines have been shown over decades to be very effective. Vaccines work. And if you look at this slide, you'll see a number of diseases that were causing significant health problems to individuals prior to the age of vaccination. And you notice after vaccines were developed against many of these diseases like measles, polio, pertussis, the incidence and the numbers of individuals in Canada that actually had these diseases drop down from between 50 and 99%. Vaccines work, and vaccines are an important tool in our arsenal to combat this disease, COVID-19. And in fact, we've been told from the WHO that apart from the provision of clean water, vaccines have had more profound effects on world health, especially of children, than any other public health measure. So let's talk about how these vaccines against COVID-19 have been developed. As I said, there are over 200 vaccines against COVID-19 in various stages of development, and 2 have been authorized for use, emergency use in Canada and the US, and 2 others are about to be authorized in our jurisdiction. The vaccines that you're probably aware of are the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, and soon to be authorized will be the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. Now, a lot of individuals feel that these vaccines have been developed too rapidly in order for them to be safe. Well, as far back as 1997, researchers were looking at the possibility of using DNA and RNA vaccines to treat disease and to prevent disease. And this manuscript on the slide is from 1997, and it's talking about a prototype DNA vaccine that was being developed and shown to be effective in terms of producing an immune response and protecting animals against measles. Also, recently, Time magazine featured this husband and wife team from the company BioNTech. BioNTech is a company that developed the mRNA vaccine that Pfizer is actually using. This husband and wife team, Dr. Sehan and Dr. Tereshi, started this company in 2008. But Dr. Tereshi has been working on messenger RNA as a potential vaccine and as a potential treatment for cancer since 1997. So a lot of the work has been done trying to develop these technologies and also trying to perfect them. In addition, in 2002 and 2012, we first saw similar coronaviruses to the one that is responsible for COVID-19, the SARS virus and the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus. And many researchers have been working on developing vaccines for these viruses all the way back to 2002 and 2012. And on this slide, you can see 2 researchers from the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Kizzy Corbett and Dr. Barney Graham. And these individuals have been working on the MERS vaccine. Unfortunately, a lot of companies that were working on SARS and MERS stopped their work when these viruses disappeared. But a lot of academic groups, including this one, continued their work and were able to show that they could use a certain protein on the surface of the MERS virus to develop a vaccine. The protein is the S protein, and this is the same protein that is a target of the immune system against the virus that causes COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2. This group did some pioneering work on the S protein of the MERS coronavirus, which is totally applicable to the COVID-19 virus. And this protein, the S protein, it is the basis of most of the vaccines that are in development against COVID-19. And this team, 4 or 5 years ago, did the groundwork that is being applied to COVID-19 vaccines. So if we look at the development path of a vaccine, we can see that there's a preclinical phase where vaccines are tested in animals. They're looking for the ability of the vaccines to induce an immune response and to be safe. And then they move into clinical testing where they're tested in humans, initially in phase 1. small numbers of humans just to make sure that the vaccine is safe, moving to phase 2 where maybe hundreds of individuals are tested to see if there's an immune response, and into larger numbers of thousands of individuals in phase 3 to see whether the vaccine can protect against disease. And following phase 3, the vaccine, after it's been launched, is monitored for a number of years to look for any rare events that might indicate some safety issue. Now, because of the work that's already been done in relation to other coronaviruses, the preclinical phase of the work for COVID has been very rapid because most of the work has already been done with SARS and MERS. And so it's only a few experiments were needed to be done to translate that work into the COVID-19 vaccine. And because of that knowledge, the regulatory authorities have enabled that work, that new work in animals, to be done in parallel with phase 1 studies in humans. And in addition, because of the emerging necessity to get a vaccine rapidly, the regulatory authorities have enabled the researchers to combine phase 1 and phase 3 of the vaccine development program so that we can move this vaccine program along in terms of development to tackle this pandemic. And that has been done without compromising any safety. Most of the vaccines that we actually use today, there's a critical safety window in which researchers and regulatory authorities want to make sure that the vaccine is safe. And this is a 60-day window after the vaccine has been given in these trials. Most of the vaccines that we've had in the past have had to pass this 60-day window where they show no serious adverse effects. And these new COVID vaccines have had to pass this criteria as well. So how do these vaccines work? Well, the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19 has certain spike proteins. These are in orange or yellow on the screen. These proteins interact with receptors, ACE2 receptors, on the surface of cells in the respiratory tract and, in fact, all over the body. And the idea for a vaccine is to develop antibodies against this surface protein so that it prevents the protein from interacting or docking with its receptor, because that's how the virus gets into the cell and infects the cell. There are numerous types of coronaviruses, vaccines that are in development. On the right of the screen, you can see a whole virus, and this is a typical way of making a vaccine, a traditional way, where the virus is inactivated, so it doesn't cause disease, but it can induce an immune response. Then we have proteins from the surface of the virus, like influenza antigen or hepatitis B antigen. This is a type of protein vaccine, and the protein represents the protein on the surface of the virus. The protein is purified and used as a vaccine, and sometimes the proteins can assemble themselves spontaneously into what we call virus-like particles, or instead of giving the actual protein or the attenuated virus as a vaccine, we can give the body the actual code or the message so that the body itself can make that protein. The immune system will say, this is foreign, and then the immune system will make antibodies and generate T cells and other immune effector molecules against the virus. And the vaccines that have been approved up to this point are RNA and DNA vaccines. And they've been approved because they can be produced rapidly. For the other types of vaccines, the vaccine manufacturers have to make new manufacturing facilities and extensive work and time to grow the virus or to make the protein. But with these vaccines, the RNA and DNA vaccines, our cells are actually the manufacturing plants. And so a whole component of the vaccine development process has been bypassed by using RNA and DNA vaccines. Now, in our cells, there are two major components in a particular cell. There's the main part of the cell, it's called the cytosol, and then there's the nucleus. DNA is found in the nucleus of our cells, in our chromosomes. And when our bodies want to make a protein, they go to DNA and they look at the large database of recipes, if you like, to make various proteins. That's what DNA is. It has the code, the recipe for the various proteins that we need our bodies to use. And you can think of DNA as a type of read-only file on a computer. So it doesn't do anything, but it has all the information there. So if the body wants to make a protein, it will create a photocopy, if you like, called messenger RNA of the part of the DNA that encodes for the protein that the cell wants to make. This happens outside of the nucleus, and the cell machinery will translate that code into the protein that's needed to be made. Now, DNA is being used as one of the vaccines, and if you look on the screen, you'll see that the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines are using DNA as the vaccine. The recently approved Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are based on RNA. And both of them eventually will enable the cells to make the protein, the S protein, that is the component, the most important component of the vaccine eventually. So basically, if you look at the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, the RNA is actually put into a lipid like a fatty vesicle to protect it, and then that's given to our bodies. Our cells will see the RNA, make the protein from it, the protein will be released into the body, and our immune system will recognize this as being foreign and generate an immune response to it. The DNA vaccines are slightly different because the DNA needs to get into the nucleus compartment of the cell. And to do this, you need to be able to transport the DNA into the nucleus. And this is done by utilizing transport viruses. And in this case, adenovirus, either a chimp or a human adenovirus, which normally causes a common cold, but in this situation, they've modified the virus so it doesn't cause disease, but it can get the DNA into the nucleus. The DNA goes to the nucleus, and our mechanisms for making protein convert that DNA into RNA in the cytosol outside of the nucleus. And again, the protein, S protein, is made, and our body's immune system responds to it. So that when the real virus comes along now, these cells which produce the antibodies and these T cells, they actually have a memory, and they're sitting there, and they've been taught to recognize this protein on the surface of the virus. And when we are infected, we can mount a strong immune response against the virus. So what's in the vaccine? Well, the vaccine is a very simple mix of substances. You have the RNA in the case of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, and you also have these lipid vesicles that the RNA is in. The lipid is just like a fatty vesicle. RNA is very labile. It's not very stable, so it has to be protected. And these lipid fatty vesicles, which are microscopic, they protect the RNA so they can get to the cells without being destroyed. And these lipids, these fatty lipids, are very sensitive to temperature. And because these vaccines have to be stored at very low temperatures, the vaccine also has sugar, in this case sucrose, which protects the fatty layers surrounding the messenger RNA. And finally, we have salts. And these salts are there to make sure that the composition, the salt composition of the vaccine is similar to the salt composition in our bodies. And sometimes we think of this as in terms of pH. So these vaccines are very, very simple. The DNA vaccines are even simpler because there you've just got the transport virus, the adenovirus, in a very simple solution. And you notice these vaccines, they don't have any electromagnetic particles that you often hear about. They don't have substances that can cause infertility. They're nanoparticles, but there's nothing strange about a nanoparticle. It just refers to the size of the particle, the lipid fatty particle that the RNA is in, which is 10 to the minus 9 meters, which is a very microscopic size. So these vaccines are very simple. Let's go back now and look at the efficacy of these vaccines. How effective are they? Now, this is a busy slide, but it has a lot of information that's really important. And it shows and compares the vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna. And as you can see, over 30,000 individuals were enrolled in these vaccine trials. And some of the studies were done in different parts of the world to make sure that different ethnicities were involved in the studies. And for instance, in the Moderna and the Pfizer studies, 10% of the participants were black, 25% were Hispanic, about 10%, 5 to 10% Asian, and the rest were Caucasian. These vaccines were tested, and these vaccine studies are still ongoing because the approval of these vaccines is based on interim data. The pandemic, because of this, its severity, regulatory authorities have required that sufficient data is generated, although the study isn't finished, but sufficient data is generated to show that these vaccines are effective and safe. And these vaccines have been shown to be around 95% effective. And that is 95% of the individuals who take these vaccines did not have mild or severe COVID disease. And this was disease that was confirmed by laboratory testing. So these vaccines are extremely, extremely effective. And there are a number of vaccines that are in development, as I said, and some in other parts of the world, but all of the vaccines have had at least 50% protective efficacy, and most of them between 70 and 95% effective. Now, when the regulatory authorities were deciding what level of efficacy would they want to see in a vaccine for COVID, they were asking for at least 50% efficacy. And as you can see, most of the vaccines are above that threshold. So these vaccines are very, very effective. And in addition to the clinical trial data, we also have data from the real live use of these vaccines in the community. And one of the areas that has really rolled out the vaccine rapidly and effectively is Israel. 61% of their 9 million individuals have at least received one dose of the vaccine. This is a Pfizer vaccine. And studies have shown in real use of these vaccines that this vaccine is 92% effective in the community, looking at hundreds of thousands of individuals in real life use, which matches the efficacy that was shown in the clinical studies. So these vaccines are very effective. Now let's look at the safety. This slide shows typical safety profile for following the Pfizer or during the Pfizer vaccine trial. And most of the side effects that were seen, and really the side effects are adverse events in science, adverse events, are typical of what you see when you're vaccinated against flu or shingles or other vaccines that we normally take. So some individuals get headaches, fever, pain at the site of the reaction, sometimes some joint problems, but these usually disappear after hours or after a few days. And if you look at the Pfizer vaccine in terms of the reactogenicity compared to other vaccines, it's probably more reactive in terms of these side effects than influenza, but less so than the shingles vaccine. And you can see even the placebo causes effects at the site of immunization. So these vaccines are as safe and typically give you the same types of adverse events that you would see with regular vaccines. Now, what about more serious events or reactions after getting the vaccine? On this slide, you'll see that data from real-life use of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines in the US. And this data was assembled after 2 million doses of Pfizer and 4 million doses of Moderna vaccine were distributed and administered in the US. And the rate of severe adverse events, as you can see, were very rare. The rate was very low. And these were mainly anaphylactic or allergic reactions that you've probably heard about in the media. And in terms of 1 million doses, for the Pfizer vaccine, we find that only about 10 individuals per 1 million doses of the vaccine actually saw these rare anaphylactic allergic responses. It was even less in terms of the Moderna vaccine, where 2.5 persons per million saw these severe adverse reactions, a little bit higher than what you'd see with influenza. But you have to remember, these reactions, these allergies can be treated on the spot. That's why we're asked to stay around for 15 or 30 minutes after getting even a regular flu vaccine. So these reactions are very, very rare. And if you look at these reactions in relation to the risk of getting COVID, and this is again US data, nearly 1 in 12 Americans have been tested positive for COVID-19. 1 in 12. Now, most of these individuals will have mild disease or they'll be asymptomatic. But we know that even in these populations, later on, there could be long-lasting effects in terms of lung function and cardiac problems. But what's really surprising and daunting is the fact that 1 in 1,000 Americans have died as a result of COVID-19. 1 in 1,000. And when you compare that with the risk of getting a rare side reaction that can be treated or that can disappear after a few days, the risk-benefit ratio is very clear. The benefits of these vaccines more than outweigh the risks. And this is the reason why these vaccines have been approved for emergency use by regulatory authorities all over the world. Now, just to close, my goal isn't really to tell you that you need to take the vaccine, but I hope that from this presentation, you've had enough information to enable you to make an informed decision about whether you should take the vaccine or not. And most faith groups agree that vaccination is part of making sure that we have healthy bodies. And including our own group as Seventh-day Adventists, we have an immunization document that talks about the role of immunization in terms of how the church sees it. And I think it's a very balanced document because it emphasizes that immunization, just like living a healthy lifestyle and following the biblical principles, is part of the way that we're going to stay healthy. And the other part that I like about this is that it also reflects our values as Christians. Philippians 2, 3 and 4 tells us that we shouldn't only look out for ourselves and our own interests, but take an interest in others. And we should use our freedoms to serve one another in love. And the idea of vaccination is an idea that, yes, it's telling us that we need to protect ourselves, but it also reflects our duty to the community in terms of herd immunity. I hope this has clarified a number of issues and questions that you may have about the vaccine, and I hope that you'll be able to make an informed decision about the vaccine in the future. Thank you.
Ayan, thank you so much po kay ah, Dr. David Burt. Ano po? At nawa po mga kapatid at mga kaibigan, tayo po ay nagkaroon ng napakalinaw na pag-aaral tungkol po sa vaccination. At talagang makikita natin mga kapatid na meron pong mga side effect ito, pero mga ilang araw daw po sabi ni Dr. David ay mawawala. At bakit napakabilis ng vaccine? Bakit agad-agad ay nagkaroon agad ng vaccine? Sapagkat noong matagal na po pala mga kapatid na noong mga 1990s, ang sabi ni Dr. David Burt, na kung saan meron na rin palang mga lumitaw na halos kamukha po nung virus po na ito, yung SARS-CoV, ayan. At noon pa lamang daw po ay gumagawa na sila ng vaccine patungkol po rito. At ngayon po nung lumitaw itong COVID vaccine ay meron ng pag-aaral. Ano po? Kasi ang SARS-CoV at ito pong COVID-19 ayon po sa kanya, ito daw po ay magkahawig at talagang halos parehas daw po itong virus na ito. Kaya mabilis po nila ang nanggagawa ng vaccine, ano po mga kapatid. At ganun din po ay bakit hindi po dumaan sa tamang proseso, yung bakit 'di ba po sabi nung iba ay dapat ituturok muna sa animals at sa susunod sa ibang animals tapos i-testing sa kaunting grupo ng tao. Meron na rin po pala na noon pa lamang po ay tinest na po nila ito sa animals doon sa SARS-CoV. At dahil nga po halos magkahawig sila ng COVID-19 virus, ay hindi na po masyadong pinatagal pa yung pag-aaral sapagkat sabi po nila ay halos parehas lang din naman sila at halos parehas po sila ng gamot, ano po mga kapatid. At ngayon po ay meron pong tanong dito si kapatid na Beth Galang. Sabi niya rito, Pastor, bakit yung mga na-vaccine, nadapuan pa rin sila ng COVID? Yung iba naman po namamatay, lalo yun na nag-second dose tas nadapuan na ng variant na matay din. Ayan ang sabi po ni kapatid na Beth Galang. Dito po sa unahin ko po yung bakit nadapuan pa rin sila ng COVID. Tandaan natin mga kapatid, yung vaccine, hindi po ito dahil na-vaccine ka ay hindi ka na mag-iingat at hindi ka na madadapuan ng virus. Mga kapatid, once na na-vaccine ka, ito po ay protection natin sa ating pangangatawan. Na kung saan sabi po ni Dr. David Burt, 95% effective po ito. At sinubukan ito sa komunidad. Sa Israel, 92% ay naging effective. At tandaan natin mga kapatid, magkaka-COVID pa rin po tayo. Magkaka-virus po tayo sa pag nagpa-vaccine tayo. Pero, ang sabi po ni Dr. David Burt kanina, sabi niya, magkaka-COVID tayo, pero hindi tayo yung severe reaction na dulot ng COVID virus sa atin ay hindi po ito mangyayari sa atin. Kumbaga nandoon lamang po tayo sa mild at sa pinakamahina. Kumbaga magkaka-virus ka pero agad-agad malalabanan po ito ng inyo pong katawan. Ano po? Katulad na lamang po sa chickenpox. 'Di ba lahat po tayo siguro na vaccine about sa chickenpox, sa measles, ayan, nung tayo po ay mga sanggol. Pero bakit kapag tayo po ay tumanda na o o kaya nagkaedad, nagkaka-chickenpox pa rin tayo. Pero kung atin pong titingnan mga kapatid, hindi tayo exempted na magka-chickenpox. Magkaka-chickenpox tayo. Ngunit, hindi po magiging malala yung epekto sa atin. Hindi katulad sa mga wala pong natanggap na vaccine ng chickenpox. So, ganun din po sa COVID vaccine. Merong itong magkaka-COVID pa rin tayo, pero tayo po ay hindi na yung malalang sitwasyon ang makaka-apekto sa atin, kundi magiging mild lamang po ito, sabi ni Dr. David Burt kanina. Ayan, sana po ay nasatisfy po kayo, kapatid na Betgalang. At ganun din po, meron pa po ba kayong tanong, mga kapatid? Kay Nanay Julieta Bundok, sabi niya rito, ako po, takot ako magpa-vaccine. Yes, nafe-feel po kita, Nanay. Marami po sa atin yung natatakot po sa vaccine dahil lalong-lalo na yung mga pinapalabas ngayon na sa social media natin, na kung saan, alam niyo po mga kapatid, kung titignan naman talaga natin, kung pag-aaralan natin mabuti, wala silang malalim na pag-aaral tungkol sa vaccine. Hindi katulad kay Dr. David Burt. Basta nagsasalita sila ng sarili nilang mga pananaw, mga mababaw na pag-aaral. At talagang, kumbaga kung magsalita sila mga kapatid, akala mo meron silang proof talaga. Pero wala naman talaga mga kapatid. Kaya, mga kapatid, sana po naging malaki ang tulong sa atin itong pag-aaral na ito na binahagi sa atin ni Dr. David Burt na isang immunologist. At ayun nga po yung tanong ni kapatid na Beth Galang kanina, bakit meron daw namamatay sa vaccine? Hindi ko po alam. So far po sa akin po, kapatid na Beth, ako po ay wala pa po akong nabalitaan na namatay sa vaccine. Hindi ko po alam, siguro po kung meron po kayong nabalitaan na namatay sa vaccine. So far po sa akin, wala po akong nabalitaan. Dito po, napakarami na pong mga kapatid natin na nagpa-vaccine, mga pastor na nagpa-vaccine, at mga mga frontliners natin na nagpa-vaccine, at wala po sa kanila yung namatay. Siguro po mayroong mga side effect, pero ito po ay kalaunan, nawawala lang din po. At meron din po yung mga severe reaction, sabi ni Dr. David Burt kanina. Pero ito po ay 10 sa 1,000,000 mga tao o 1,000,000 mga tao. So, baga, sa 1,000,000, meron pong 10 na nakaranas ng severe reaction. At yung nakaranas po ng mga severe reaction na yun, sila po yung mga asymptomatic, may COVID na talaga sila, pero may COVID sila pero hindi nila alam yung walang mga sinyales. Pangalawa, sila po yung mga tinatawag natin na meron pong allergists reaction sa mga gamot. Sila po yung nagkakaroon ng severe reaction. Kaya po kung kayo po ay magpapabaksin mga kapatid, tatanungin po tayo ng mga doktor doon. May screening po kasi yan mga kapatid. Meron ka ba nararamdaman na ganito, ganyan, ganito, ganyan? Tapos ikaw ba'y nakakaramdam ng ganito? So may screening po ito bago ko po kayong i-vaccine. At yun po mga kapatid, wala na po ako nakikita rito mga tanong. Sana po ay naging malinaw po sa ating lahat mga kapatid. At meron po tayong part 2 po nitong video na ito. Meron namang sasagutin si Dr. David Burt ayon po sa mga ilan na mga katanungan din ng ating mga kapatid. Siya po ay i-interviewin po ng conference president po nila dito sa tong conference nila, nakalimutan ko mga kapatid. But anyway, sa susunod po natin yan. Po sa Friday po siguro ng 8:00 din ng gabi. Ayan, 8 to 9. Friday. Ngayon po darating na Friday. Sabi po rito ni Beth Galang, okay po, Pastor, akala ko walang screening. Opo, meron pong screening. Bago kayo bakunahan, i-screening po kayo. Kayo ba ay nagkasakit ng ganito? May allergies ba kayo? Meron ba kayo sakit sa puso? Kayo ba ay nagka-COVID na dati? Kayo ba ay nabakunahan, naoperahan? Maraming itatanong sa inyo bago kayo turukan. At ang alam ko po, kapag meron kayo sa ilan ng mga tanong na ito, baka hindi po itutuloy yung inyo pong vaccination. maraming mga itatanong sa inyo. So, yan, sana po ay nagkaroon po ng linaw sa atin. Ayan. So far po ay wala na pong mga tanong dito mga kapatid. At purihin natin ang Diyos sapagkat meron po siyang lingkod na pinapadala upang bigyan tayo ng kalinawan sa ating pong mga katanungan, lalong-lalo na po sa COVID vaccination mga kapatid. Mga kapatid, marami po tayo maririnig na turo. Marami tayong maririnig na mga disapprove ng ilan sa ating mga kapatid. At maraming tayo mapapanood sa social media. Ang kailangan pa rin natin mga kapatid, manalangin tayo sa Panginoon. Tulungan niya po tayo na bigyan tayo ng katalinuhan, malaman natin ang katotohanan. Mga kapatid, nais ko pong sabihin sa bawat isa sa atin, ang vaccination po, wala po itong kinalaman sa religious issue. Sa mark of the beast, or kapag nagpa-vaccine ka ay mapupunta ka na kay Satanas. Wala kinalaman ito sa religious issue. Ito po ay tungkol sa health issue lahat mga kapatid. At sabi po rito ay 95% effective ang vaccine na ito at makakatulong sa atin. Mga kapatid, ito pong pag-aaral natin sa gabing ito, hindi po ito para pilitin tayo magpa-vaccine, kundi para bigyan lamang po ng linaw ang ating pong mga katanungan at mga agam-agam sa ating pong mga pag-iisip, mga kapatid. Ayan. Sabi po rito ni Virnas, si kapatid na Virnas Sendanya, kay Alan po kasi pastor, sabi ng doktor sa kanya, pag nagka-COVID ka na after 1 month pa, bago ka pwede magpa-vaccine. Depende pa din po sa advice ng doktor. Opo, tama po kayo kapatid na Virna. Kapag nagka-COVID ka, ay meron pong advice ang doktor. Meron pong pinapalipas na mga ilang buwan bago kayong i-vaccine ulit. At ayon nga po dito sa doktor po na inyo pong mister, 1 month yung kanya binigay na palugig. Tama po kapatid. Kapag nagka-COVID tayo. Meron din po yung tanong kapag nagka-COVID na ba, pastor, ay hindi na ba natin kailangan magpa-vaccine? Sa Friday po mga kapatid, ayaw ko pong ayaw ko pong pangunahan si Dr. David Burt. Sa Friday po, isa po sa sasagutin niya ito pong tanong na ito. Mga kapatid. Ayan, sana po ay nagkaroon tayo ng kasagutan sa ating mga katanungan. Marami tayong nalaman sa gabing ito tungkol po sa vaccine na ito po ay effective 95% sa bawat isa sa atin. Kaya po mga kapatid, kung meron pong mga kapatid tayo na nagdududa pa rin sa vaccine, maaari po nating i-share ito pong video na ito sa kanila upang bago po sila umayaw, bago nila husgahan ang ating mga kapatid na nagpa-vaccine, dapat po muna malaman nila kung ano ba yung vaccine talaga. Meron pong malalim na pag-aaral katulad po ng shinare ni kapatid o ni Dr. David Burt. Ayan. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat mga kapatid at mga kaibigan. At nawa po lahat tayo ay natulungan ng pag-aaral na ito sa gabing ito mga kapatid. At nawa po, ingat po tayong lahat. At nawa po ay sa anumang pong sakuna, anuman pong mga pagsubok ang ating pong maranasan, tandaan po natin, ang Diyos po ang sagot sa lahat ng pagsubok. Ngayon po mga kapatid ay nais nating ibigay ang pagkakataon sa ating kapatid na dito po sa ating kapatid na Trisel Minrel. Sa kanya pong kakantahin na Trash is Heart para sa ating pagtatapos ng ating programa. Ayan.
All things work for our good, though sometimes we don't see how they could. Struggles that break our hearts in two sometimes blind us to the truth. Our Father knows what's best for us. He you just don't see him. Remember, you're never alone. God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when you don't see his plan, when you can't trace his head, trust his heart. Trust his heart. His is a master plan, and he holds our future in his hands. So don't leave us those who have no hope. Our hope is found in him. We see the present clearly, but his is the first and the last. And like a tapestry, he's weaving you and me to someday be just like him. God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when you don't see his plan, when you can't trace his head, trust his heart. He alone is faithful and true. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when you don't see his plan, when you can't trace his head, trust his heart. When you don't understand, when you don't see his plan, when you can't trace his head, trust his
Ayan, thank you so much kay Minrel, ano po, sa napakagandang aawitin niya. Trust His heart, mga kapatid, sa panahon na marami pong bumabagabag sa ating puso. Magtiwala tayo sa Panginoon. Mga kapatid, tayo po ay maging protektado araw-araw sa tulong po ng ating pong Panginoong Diyos. Tayo po ay yumuko sa ating panalangin. Dakilang Diyos na makapangyarihan sa lahat, maraming salamat po, Panginoon, na binigyan niyo po kami ng kalinawan sa aming mga katanungan patungkol po sa COVID vaccine, Panginoon Diyos. Dalangin po namin, Ama, na kayo po ay patuloy na tumulong sa bawat isa sa amin. At tulungan niyo po kami, Panginoon, na maging protektado sa aming araw-araw ng buhay. Sa pangalan ni Jesus. Amen. And amen. Mga kapatid at mga kaibigan, ingat po tayong lagi at tayo po ay laging maging protektado sa ating pong buhay. Lalong-lalo na po ngayon na dumadami na naman ang cases po ng Delta variant. Mga kapatid, ingat po tayo. Nawa po lagi po tayong maging protektado araw-araw. At stay safe. At tayo po ay sundin natin ang mga health protocol ng ating pong mga gobyerno. Maraming salamat po, mga kapatid at mga kaibigan. Ito po ang ating pong programang The Unchangeable Truth Ministry. Ako po ang inyong lingkod, si Pastor Erico Viernes Trono Jr. na nagsasabing tayo po ay patuloy kumapit sa ating Panginoon upang tayo ay patuloy na kanyang maligtas. Maraming salamat po, mga kapatid. God bless po sa ating lahat.